Hi, I'm Jeremy Knindike, and you're listening to Forced from Home, a podcast about global displacement.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. As the daughter of immigrants, I'm so proud to represent Queens, New York, the world's borough, and a strong community of immigrants and refugees, including a large Afghan community. Even though we promised them safety in exchange for risking their lives for our country, thousands of our vetted Afghan allies remain stranded abroad, including relatives of some of my constituents. Last month, this administration reportedly decided to close Camp As Sayliyah and force 1,100 Afghans there to choose between going to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they have no ties and which is facing an Ebola crisis, and Afghanistan, which would be a death sentence. What is the plan to help our vetted Afghan allies who were promised safety in the U.S.? Can you rule out third country options, especially DRC? You mentioned earlier that the State Department won't deport people to conflict zones. Can you rule that out going forward?
You mean rule out the DRC?
Yes.
Well, ultimately, these people would have to agree that they're going to go to DRC as well, because that's what we want to do, is give them 7 or 8 options rather than 1 or 2. And I imagine if we can find more options for them, and there are some countries, look, I think the problem is not that I'm trying to, we could probably talk to your staff about it. A lot of these countries are in nascent talks with us about their willingness to assume some of these people.
Are they conflict zones? Can we rule out deporting people to conflict zones?
Well, I don't remember all 5 or 6 of them, but I don't think that any of them would be conflict zones, is my recollection.
I think it's important for America to keep our promise as well, in the interest of national security, our word to our global allies, to people who we made a promise to. 1,100 versus 17,000, 1,100 vetted allies who already helped this country. I think they should be given consideration and not sent to conflict zones.
That was Congresswoman Grace Meng questioning Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week about Afghans who are stranded in Qatar and being refused entry as refugees into the United States. This week on Forced from Home, we talked to one of those Afghans, a young woman who is currently living on a U.S. military base in Qatar, about what life is like there and how her family is coping with being in limbo, about what would happen if she and her family were forced to return to Afghanistan, and about some of her hopes and dreams for coming to the United States to live safely and continue her education, something that is not possible for her in her home country right now. Then I talked to Rina Amiri, the former U.S. Special Envoy for Afghan Women and Girls, about the needs of Afghan women and girls both inside Afghanistan and those who are trying to flee for safety outside the country. She talks about the Trump administration's decisions to cut foreign aid and block refugee resettlement and how all of that has disproportionately harmed women and girls in Afghanistan. And hang on after that conversation for a few other important headlines about global displacement. First, let's kick off with a little background on the threats facing Afghan women and girls since the fall of Kabul to the Taliban in 2021. In the immediate aftermath of that, the U.S. evacuated more than 80 to 90,000 Afghans from the country, who then, over the following months, made their way to refuge in the United States. Other Afghans who were not part of that immediate evacuation but had worked with the U.S. government were also given a way to come to the United States through the Special Immigrant Visa Program. And over the last 5 years, the U.S. issued around 120,000 of those special immigrant visas. Many of those who received them were flown to Camp As Sayliyah, a U.S. military base in Qatar that then became a transit and processing center for Afghan refugees who were going through screening and interviews prior to being settled into the U.S. The camp was never meant to be a place where Afghans permanently lived, but since the Trump administration halted entry of Afghans into the United States last year, it has become effectively a long-term holding facility for approximately 1,100 Afghans, about 400 of whom are children. These people are now stuck in a bureaucratic limbo. The U.S. government had told these people that they were going to Qatar only temporarily to complete their resettlement process to the U.S. But they have been waiting for more than a year, and this past April, reports leaked that the U.S. government was considering sending them to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Secretary Rubio told Congress last week that the government is looking at least 5 other different countries as possible destinations for these Afghans as well. It seems that the one country that they simply will not consider is actually letting them come to the United States as they were promised. And of course, the Afghan families stranded in Qatar are just a fraction of the Afghans who need safe resettlement outside of their country. About 265,000 Afghans remain in the U.S. visa pipeline overseas, the majority of whom served alongside the U.S. government in Afghanistan and qualify for the special immigrant visa. So let's hear from one of those stranded Afghans now. I want to welcome our first guest, Zahra, who is a young woman from Afghanistan who currently lives with her family on Camp As Sayliyah in Doha, Qatar. We are not sharing her full name because of the sensitivity of their situation, but she was connected to us through our friends at the Afghan Evac Coalition. It is a true privilege to talk with you today. Zahra, welcome to Forced From Home. You've been living at Camp As Sayliyah for some time now. Can you tell us the story of why your family left Afghanistan and how you made it to Qatar?
We left Afghanistan in 2025, 15th of January. And the story, both my parents, they were military army officers back in Republic government. And the case is for my mom, because she's a woman and she was working with Air Force Academy in Afghanistan. And during that our case was under process, we passed all the security screenings, the requirements that were needed, and the medical interviews, everything. And everything comes down to 2 days or 3 days before our flight. It was 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was in my sweet dream. My mom said that, hey, wake up. There was a text on the phone translated that, what is it saying? And I was like, oh, Mom, I'm so tired. Let me sleep. But after a lot of struggling, I couldn't sleep. So I took the phone and I read the message. And in the message, it said that, in the message, it was written that you have flight on January 15, 2025. And I was shocked because I couldn't believe that finally I'm going out of my country and I am going to continue my study. And I was so happy. Then I said to my mom that, hey, Mom, it is saying that, the text is saying that. And my mom, she was also happy. And I was both happy and nervous. We packed our stuff, we received our ticket and things that were necessary. And finally, the flight day, we went to the airport and we passed some security checks, checking the bag and stuff like that. So I was nervous because I was afraid of one thing, that what it stops the airport stop, if any of them stop us and ask us that where are we going or why are you going? What's the reason you're traveling? So I was shaking. I was so nervous. But fortunately, we made it to the departure lounge. When we sat there on the chair, I was still shaking. I was so nervous and afraid that maybe now the one of the airport stops will come. Every minute was equal to 1 hour for me that time. And I was so nervous. That even I went to a restroom and I was sweating a lot. And the speaker announced that passengers to Sharjah, please, your plane is ready, you can go. We went to the plane and I sat on the chair. We sat on chair. Then everything was perfect. Everything was set up at the time. Then until the plane took off, I was so shaking. And my mom, same thing to my mom. She kept saying that no one will come. And I was comforting her that no, don't worry, no one will come. That's fine. And after plane took off, I finally got a sigh of relief. So now, and I was finally relieved that, okay, it's done. Everything is done now. We're safe. So I wanted to go into Sharjah. It was a 4-hour flight from Kabul to Sharjah. Then we had a break there. After that, we went from Sharjah to Qatar. So we had all of those. There were staffs helping us. And yeah, everything was perfect. Everything was clear that time. There was no problems. Then we came to Qatar airport. After that, another staff, they took us to cars, like buses, and they took us to here camp. And then here in the camp, they asked some question, how are you doing, how was the flight, and stuff like that. So then, even that we came to the camp, we passed all our biometrics, screenings, and other legal requirements. So we were waiting to go to America, but unfortunately it didn't happen. So that's how we came here.
And so you have been on that base now for almost a year and a half. Is that right?
Yeah, for 1.5 years, me and my family, we are living in the camp.
And what is daily life like for you on the base, especially now that there is a conflict going on in the region? Qatar has been attacked at times. So what is your daily life like now?
My daily life, we talk about the conflicts that were going on. The conflicts, those weeks were so frightening, especially for kids and pregnant women, and let alone to adults. Leave adults. Let's talk about children and pregnant women. They were frustrated. Kids were crying. I remember when, before any message we were receiving an alarm, when everybody were receiving alarm, people, they start panicking, especially kids. They were crying, screaming. One night, my brother, he went outside and he said that I'm going to play. And we were just sitting comfortably. We were just sitting until we heard missile again. And my brother, he came screaming. He's 11-year-old. He came screaming and crying. He said that I saw the missiles out of the sky. They were disrupting each other, and I saw that with my eyes. And I was like, oh, that's fine, no problem. That's okay. Just go and drink some water. Because I couldn't say to my little brother that, oh my God, you saw that. Oh, I couldn't do that to him. So I tried to comfort everybody at home, because my mom, she had depression. I also had depression. And my dad, he had heart issue. I'm the firstborn of family. I comforted everyone. I tried to comfort everyone. I couldn't comfort my brother clearly, like good. I couldn't comfort him because he was crying a lot. He was just saying that I don't want to die. I'm still a child. I have dreams. To chase. I want to go and study. And it was breaking my heart a lot.
And did they do anything to protect you on the base? Did they give you any guidance on how to stay safe during the fighting?
They were just saying that you shouldn't go out of your home, or like when they were hitting the alarm while they were sending text on WhatsApp group. So they were just saying that don't go out, and there were alarms all in all buildings. And they were just saying that don't go out. And after the missiles, like after everything was just a bit okay, everything returned to normal, they were saying that, yeah, you can go out, but still be careful. After, I think, 1 week or 2 weeks of the conflict, they got bunkers. I think they called bunker or something.
Mm-hmm. Bunkers?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it was bunkers for safety. But people, they were not satisfied with that because it wasn't what people really expect them to do. So they wanted stuff at the camp to take them to somewhere safe, at least until the end of the conflict. And what was most frightening for me that I experienced during the conflicts was pregnant women and kids crying, and they were so afraid. And some pregnant women that I know them, I tried to comfort them that that's fine, it's gonna end, because it was so hard for them. And I can understand that how hard it is to live in uncertainty and then missiles and conflict starts.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. So yeah, it was such a bad period, but I hope it ends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're all hoping very much for this war to finally stop.
Yeah.
So Zahra, I understand that you and your family applied for refugee status a few years ago, and you've been through a very intensive vetting process, but you don't yet have a final determination. And so you're basically stuck now in Qatar waiting for an answer. What are you being told by the U.S. government about where things stand?
So The only thing that we hear from camp or staff is that they were saying that our colleagues are working in Washington, and we don't have any update regarding to a third country, whether they will take us to America or to any third country. And they're saying that once we receive an update, we will inform you all. That's what camp officials say about how long we will stay here. So it means that we will stay as long as is possible and until they find a country or whether they will take us to America. So we will stay here.
So you're not really being told much beyond maybe a third country, no answer about going to America, and now you've been in that situation for almost a year and a half. Must be really difficult to have to wait like that without much information.
Definitely, yeah. Because I came here with the hope of going to America so I can continue my education. That it was my dream to go because this is my fifth year that I'm not attending school. Fifth or fourth year. I am desperate because I couldn't make it to America, but I'm still hopeful that see what will happen.
Do you have access to any kind of education there in the camp?
There's a school here, but the education system is not like America to have grades, like third grade, second grade. It's not like that. So they're only focusing on computer and English. And their English classes are just for waste of time and there's no proper education.
So the Trump administration has been talking about possibly sending Afghans from Qatar to third countries, maybe to the Democratic Republic of Congo, maybe back to Afghanistan. What kind of danger would you and your family face if you were forced back to Afghanistan?
Yeah, so let's just imagine this, that when you go to the airport back to Afghanistan, when you go to the airport, Taliban will check your documents, and there are airport staff members working with their intelligence service. And let's say that even if you manage to get through the airport, the local neighborhood representative usually reports new arrivals to Taliban. And Taliban, they will send their intelligence agents to your house to check on you. And about what will happen next, and no one knows what will happen, whether you'll be back alive, whether they will kill you. But possibly that is the only option. So, like, especially if they find out that you're a woman back working in Air Force or working as a military army officer in the public government, and you went to Doha to go, so you went to Qatar to go to America, and it's really dangerous to go back to Afghanistan.
Have you heard stories of other people who have tried to go back?
Most of them, they are leaving the camp because uncertainty, they don't know where they will take them. I don't know, it ups to them, it up to their situation, but I've learned that our situation is a situation that my parents were military or an officer. It's not an option to go back because everybody's situation is different. I'm going to say, from my point of view, going back to Afghanistan for me and my family is not an option. So others, it up to them. It's their situation, so they can decide what to do and what not to do.
But your family would face targeting and risks, both because of the military angle and because your mother was a woman working in the military.
Yes. And also you see in the news that, what's going on, they are forcing nine-year-old girls, 9-year-old children, they were still a child, 9-year-old children to get married. And like, how it's possible to go back there and there was no education there. There's no work for ladies, for women, for girls. So how they were supposed to go back there?
And what do you make of this idea of having Afghans go to the Democratic Republic of Congo? How has that been received in the camp?
So what I know, as long as I know, the camp staff stated that things that you hear from outside of the camp is not accurate. So as long as, because they say that we cannot control what's happening outside, and as long as we give you information, you have to wait. It means that things that you hear from outside, it's not true, and things we say, it's true. And people idea going to the DRC, so we all have the same idea, the same thing, that DRC is not a good option because, like, I respect all the countries, but DRC have its own issue, have its own problems, like poverty, lack of access to healthcare, education. So it's very hard for us, for people, to go there and continue their life.
Yeah. And its own conflict, and now an Ebola outbreak, and plenty of problems that would make it a very hard place to resettle refugees. I think in the last year, there has not been as much attention on the challenges for Afghan refugees as there was, I think, in the first few years after the fall of Kabul. Do you feel like the world is forgetting Afghan women and girls in particular and the challenges that they face?
So, despite the ongoing struggles by women and girls, Afghan women and girls are still being ignored, and there's no real support is being provided to them. And we need the world to make sure that they are supporting Afghan women and girls because they are in a bad situation.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you wish the world knew about Afghan refugees?
I wish both world, American people. So we want American people, the world, human rights and immigration organizations to be our voice to support Afghan women and girls and support those people that their cases are under process or their cases are being processed and they want to come to USA through legal pathway. We want them to be supported.
So you've talked a lot about your desire, your wish to continue your education. Let's talk about that a little bit. What are you hoping to study?
So, first of all, I didn't finish school. I studied at the 6th grade. And after that, I couldn't make it because Taliban didn't let girls study. I stopped there up to 6th grade. And now I would like to continue my school. And I'm not sure whether I will get this opportunity to study or no. Because with this ongoing situation, I don't think I get this chance to continue my education.
And if you come to the U.S., you would be able to do that. You would be able to catch up on your education. I think from talking to you, you'd clearly do very well here. And we, of course, really want you to have that opportunity. And I know a lot of Americans want you to have that opportunity, even if the government right now is not cooperating with that. If there's something that you could tell the American people or tell the U.S. government about your wishes and your hopes or about what your community there needs, what would that be?
So to U.S. government, I would love to say that we only want to be transferred from this camp and to be relocated to America because you promised us safety and we also deserve safety. We deserve a life with safety and dignity. So this is what everybody wants, and people want our U.S. government to at least clarify their situation because they are waiting a lot here and it's very hard for them. Most of them are developing psychological issues and they are taking medication just to cope with the stress. And also, I'm one of those people. I'm also taking medication just to cope with the stress. And I really, because kids here are going in an environment covered with walls and barbed wire. So they're spending their best period of their life in a situation in a place like this. So it's really hard. And I truly feel bad because my brother is, as I mentioned, he's 11. So I want him to study. I want him to be in a safe place and to study, to be the one he wants. And it's my wish not only for him, but for 1,100 people here.
I think that's such a powerful point that at this time in your lives, your brother's life, when you should be in school and spending time with friends and making friends, you're stuck in this military camp surrounded by barbed wire and walls and not able to continue your education. And it's not right. I really appreciate you speaking out about it. And we are going to continue doing what we can to push the U.S. government on this. We very much hope to see you here in the United States someday, and we'll keep fighting for you in the meantime. And just so impressed and privileged to hear from you and to witness your courage. And so please stay strong, and we will keep fighting for you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I hope things get well soon, and I really hope that I finally get a chance to come to USA and study.
We hope so too, and we look forward to the day when we can talk with you here in person. We've just heard the powerful story and experiences of one Afghan refugee and her family, and how they've been caught between persecution by the Taliban and abandonment by the US government. But of course, there are thousands upon thousands of others who face these risks and challenges as well. Our next guest will talk about those larger policy dimensions and what the US and the wider world can and should be doing to support Afghans, especially women and girls. We're joined now by Rina Amiri, who is the former U.S. Special Envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights. Under the Obama administration, she was a senior advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Rina has also served in the United Nations in a number of senior conflict resolution and political roles. She has spent time in academia and has been a longtime advocate championing the rights of Afghan women and girls. Rina, we're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, as the former U.S. envoy for Afghan women and girls, you spent several years during the Biden administration working at a really tough time for that agenda to advance the rights and freedom and participation of Afghan women and girls. And under Taliban rule, many of those rights are now being dismantled. Women are being erased from public life. Give us just a picture of what life looks like for women and girls in Afghanistan today.
Thank you for that question. It's an extraordinarily difficult situation. The Taliban have issued over 250 edicts since they seized power in 2021. And the majority of them, over 150 of them, are specifically targeting women and girls. The women and girls no longer are able to get an education beyond sixth grade. But these are the things that I think that the public knows. What they don't know is the extraordinary systematic approach that the Taliban has undertaken, taking away their right to public spaces. They're not even able to walk down the street and laugh. That is against the law, if you can imagine. And so they feel like they're in virtual prisons right now. This is what I'm hearing from Afghan women and girls. And it is a situation which the special rapporteur for the UN has called gender apartheid and a gender persecution. It's a crime against humanity, what is happening in Afghanistan.
So how did you as envoy try to combat that? What were some of the ways, what were some of the tools that you had or the approaches that you had to use the influence of the U.S. government and some of the tools of the U.S. government to try and preserve and protect some of that space for the rights of Afghan women and girls?
So I really worked on creating a platform and a space for Afghan women leaders to advocate on their own behalf. I set up something called the U.S. Afghan Consultative Mechanism with partners, including one of my partners was USIP. I set up an economic and education initiative called the Afghan Women's Economic Resilience Initiative. I worked with a number of partners, USAID. We did not have our own funding, so we heavily relied on US aid funding to support gender-based violence protection mechanisms, to support community-based education. We worked with referral programs that were supported by the UN or led by the UN. And we were able to mobilize the international community through our leadership because we made supporting Afghan women and girls a priority. It was something that over every country virtually that was working in Afghanistan looked at this issue as a priority and identified ways to support it, even as it was all woefully inadequate given the extreme situation that Afghan women and girls and the general population were facing. But we had some tools at our disposal.
Yeah. You mentioned USIP, you mentioned USAID, both of those now, obviously, USAID is gone. USIP's building is still there, but the organization has been shuttered, and it's the subject of a lawsuit right now against the Trump administration for trying to close it. At Refugees International, we put out a report earlier this year about the impact of the Trump administration's closure of USAID programs in Afghanistan and the impact that was having on Afghan women and girls. I think it's important for listeners to understand, while some foreign aid does continue in some countries, the administration has completely barred any U.S. foreign aid to Afghanistan, along with Yemen and Somalia. And so one of the overarching findings of that report is that the closure of those programs was, in effect, helping the Taliban by making their job easier and imposing the kind of gender apartheid that you just mentioned. Can you say more about the role that U.S. aid programs had? How did that intersect with your work as Special Envoy? And how did some of those programs preserve, imperfectly, but still importantly, space for women and girls and protection for women and girls in Afghanistan?
The USAID programs were a lifeline for Afghan women and girls. As you noted, it was woefully inadequate. Afghan women are extraordinary. They're using every space to fight back for their rights. They're not victims. They're leaders. And through USAID, we were able to support them where they could find space. As I noted, community-based education, women-led organizations working within the health sector, because the Taliban has also really hit the health sector, working to educate the population on their rights within the framework of Islam. They were working to set up underground schools for women and girls. All of that is gone. And as you rightly note, this is enabling the Taliban to remove whatever sources of resistance that Afghan women were able to find. And it's not hurting the Taliban. The Taliban were not dependent on these resources. The Afghan people were, particularly women, girls, who've always been the most vulnerable, who are the most vulnerable throughout the world. But they relied on these resources. And right now, gender-based violence has escalated and they don't have any resources. I speak to women leading shelters inside the country. And I spoke to one really prominent leader where she was sobbing to me that the Taliban were coming in and taking girls out of the shelter because she doesn't have the resources, she doesn't have the leverage to push back against the Taliban. So it's a situation that has crippled women and girls in Afghanistan.
Yeah, in our reporting, it was so clear that those aid programs were preserving services that just otherwise would not be there. And as you say, it wasn't really hurting the Taliban at all. Ironically, it was helping them. I don't think the intent is to advance the Taliban's agenda, but it takes obstacles out of the way and to the very direct detriment of women and girls there. So how are women coping in the face of that right now? What adjustments are they making? Is there anything else that's coming in to backfill the USAID programming, or are these things just flat out closed?
It's been pretty dire because as the world followed U.S. leadership and providing support to Afghanistan and particularly to Afghan women and girls, the U.S. has created permission for other countries to also remove assistance, whether it be humanitarian assistance and pathways for women and girls to leave the country and other forms of support. And so it is a situation where, unfortunately, there's very few countries that have stepped up in a meaningful way. But Afghan women are tremendously resilient, and there are many of us who are continuing to work, reaching out to countries. They advocate on their behalf, but we also try to create spaces and platforms for them to do it. The resistance continues among Afghan women. And there's a lot of space. UN Women is playing an important role, but a lot of Afghan women-led organizations that are continuing to try to raise support for their efforts. Afghan women are not turning to us. They're not turning to the world as victims. They are coming to us as leaders saying, we are prepared to resist. We are prepared to fight for our rights, but we need your support. This is Afghan women inside the country and by support, limited financial assistance. They're not asking for billions of dollars. And the Afghan women in the diaspora, who are also in a desperate situation, are also asking for our support. They're asking our political support to curb back the legitimization of the Taliban. They're asking for limited financial support so that they can continue their resistance and providing education, underground schools, health services for women and girls, and just the basic essentials. And it's really, if the public knew how little resources that this required and how essential it is to continuing the fight for moderation in Afghanistan, I think that support, I know that the support is actually there, but they need to let the administration know that this is important, both from a position of principle, but also from a strategic position.
Yeah, and some of the reporting that we did earlier this year found that among the sorts of programs that were canceled were 88% of maternal and child health funding, 94% of sexual and reproductive health funding, 80% of gender-based violence prevention and response funding. And these are things that just would not be there. You know, obviously the Taliban is not going to support these things.
You know, if I could tell you a really heartbreaking story I just heard a couple of days ago from a friend who was trying to help a relative, like this young woman who was extraordinarily hopeful about her future before the Taliban came in. She had access. She's an educated girl, but she has become suicidal under the current situation in Afghanistan. And so my friend was trying to get her mental health services, and she pointed her to one of the few health clinics that provided these type of facilities for Afghans suffering from mental health. And when she went to the clinic, they turned her away because they said, under the Taliban rule, we cannot provide mental health services for women. And it's just, this is a suicidal woman that was turned away.
It's just astonishing. In the face of that gender apartheid and that deprivation of services and persecution, many Afghan, not just women, but families with daughters, families with women, which is most families, many are trying to flee Afghanistan. And the U.S. government has for years had this special immigrant visa program that has more, I think, disproportionately benefited Afghan men and their families because it was more men than women who were working with the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and thus eligible for the SIVs. What is available for Afghan women leaders who need to flee for their own safety? What kind of pathways are there for them?
So when I was in the administration, one of the areas that, recognizing exactly what you noted, that the SIV program disproportionately benefited men who are allies from the military effort, we needed to create pathways for women who were playing incredibly important roles and were at the front lines of fighting for peace, actually, inside the country. And they were pushing for mechanisms of accountabilities, women judges, lawyers, human rights activists. There was not a pathway for them. So we really spent a lot of time trying to prioritize women and the P1 refugees referrals through UNHCR. Even within the P1, P2 pathway, women were not being prioritized. And we worked very hard to make sure that they were prioritized. Now, those programs have also been halted. We have everything. I'm going to give you a list of everything that's been suspended or halted or slowed down. Their USREP has been suspended. There's a travel ban. There are visa suspensions. The asylum adjudication system has been put on hold. Refugees are being re-vetted after facing extraordinary vetting under the Biden administration. There are benefits holds. The temporary protection status, TPS, has been terminated. So all of these lawful ways that were recourse for this very vulnerable population are being removed. These are exactly the type of leaders that we would want to come to the United States, because they would be an incredible asset. We've seen the role that they played in Afghanistan. And if we're talking about refugees and immigrants that would play inspiring roles and important roles in America, I think this is the population you would identify.
And if you go back a few generations, the founding of Refugees International in the late 70s was tied to a somewhat similar situation of advocating for Vietnamese refugees and other refugees from South Asia who were fleeing Vietnam after the war to be allowed to come into the United States. And ultimately, President Carter authorized that, and about 1 million Vietnamese refugees entered the United States over the next decade. And they have gone on to do amazing things. As you say, they have contributed in enormous ways to U.S. society. They are Oscar winners. They are members of Congress. They are business leaders. We know that welcoming refugees does a lot to strengthen U.S. society and U.S. prosperity. As you've just outlined, the administration currently seems to be determined to shut any possibility of that down. They do not want to allow any Afghans into the country. It is really a betrayal of people who aligned with what the U.S. was trying to do in Afghanistan. And now we're hearing this kind of crazy idea, at least that's been rumored, that Afghans who are stranded at Camp As Sayliyah in Qatar, and we heard from one of them earlier in the episode, that population should perhaps be sent to the DR Congo, or Secretary Rubio said earlier this week that they could be sent to some other unspecified countries that he would not name. Walk us through just how nuts that idea is and why it is such a damaging reversal.
Yeah, no, it's nothing short of surreal to take a group of refugees who've been repeatedly traumatized and lost their home. Many of them, in the course of the decades of war, have lost their home more than once. These are people who've been targeted, who've been subject to violence, who, through our vetting system and a very rigorous system, we identified as a vulnerable population. And the proposal to send them to the DRC and to other countries that are not stable and that have their own resource issues, to send them to these countries, like in DRC, where they already have over 600,000 refugees and now they're facing an Ebola crisis, to take that population and a country that they have no familiarity with, no ties with, no linguistic experience or understanding of, to take a traumatized population from one war zone to another war zone is inhumane.
Yeah.
It's cynical. And I think that the logic that's being applied is we're going to provide them an option that is absolutely untenable for them. And if they refuse it, then it gives them permission to send them back to Afghanistan, where they will certainly, their lives are going to be under threat. It's very cynical.
Yeah.
And when you asked about the implications, and I really want to focus on this, because even for those that say we worked with Afghanistan for 20 years, we've done what we can, I've heard this from other people. The situation with Afghanistan, the entire world watched Afghans for 20 years on the world stage stand as allies and partners with the United States. They saw Afghans take extraordinary risks and their partnership with the United States. When the U.S. walks away in such a callous way from this population, every other country in which the U.S. is seeking partners, and everywhere, the U.S. needs interpreters, they need implementers, the U.S. forces. Why would you risk your life if you see a partner that the U.S. repeatedly said, we will not leave behind, that now not only did we leave behind the country in a very public way that was, everyone saw the images of the airplanes with the fall of Kabul, but to see that even the allies that were at the forefront of the fight being left behind, who will want to partner with the United States again? When the U.S. breaks its promise to its allies, the world will remember, and it's not just going to impact Afghanistan. It will impact every country in which the U.S. is trying to move forward strategic priorities.
And you wrote recently in The Diplomat about this and noted, I think very importantly, this is bigger than just excluding Afghans. And as you said, there are implications that go much beyond U.S. policy towards Afghanistan. There seems to be a larger effort here to undermine the whole concept of refuge, of the concept that a refugee would have valid claim to protection in the U.S. What are the implications if they get away with that? What does that do to the global refugee regime if Afghans are abandoned in this way?
Yeah, the Secretary of State has outlined that the administration's intent is to reframe refugee status so it becomes temporary and not permanent. And with the stated expectations that refugees should ultimately expect to go back to their country, which is it's a fundamental misrepresentation of what refugee protection means under international law. What they're doing is, again, it's not just about Afghans. They are trying to dismantle the international law and the frameworks that underpin refugee protection status. That's something that should not be underestimated. This administration has been extremely calibrated and strategic in the way that it has dismantled institutions, rule of law frameworks, protection and international protection frameworks. This is a part of that. And if we don't push back and fight against this, we are creating avenues for them to move to that next step of the dismantling of the protection systems that have been set up to protect vulnerable populations and populations that are being persecuted.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, and we're going to do a future episode on this soon, the dynamic that you talked about earlier of posing this choice to people who are in limbo of either you can go to this place where you have no ties, you have no family, you have no language, no cultural connection, there's no economic opportunity for you, you're likely to have no legal rights, or you can go back to Afghanistan. That's your choice. It's a totally false choice, and it is intended to undermine the whole concept of international protection. Looking ahead, we have what we have in the U.S. for the next few years. Other countries are still doing something, but not enough. Do you feel at this point like the world is moving past and forgetting Afghanistan? Is the world abandoning Afghan women, girls? Do you see any evidence that other countries are trying to step up and offset the loss from the U.S., or is the world simply moving on?
Unfortunately, the signals are not promising that there aren't any countries that have stepped out in any meaningful or significant ways. The rhetorical support is there for Afghan women and girls, and the condemnation, but the practical means of support, including pathways for these women to leave the country, and to leave a situation that has been identified as gender persecution and gender apartheid, when that is missing, when the financial support is missing for these women to keep up their resistance, not just women, but men are also suffering inside the country, it certainly doesn't signal to the Afghan people that the international community that they stood shoulder to shoulder with and fighting for a moderate and inclusive, not just country, but they were supporting a model that we supported for the region, a model that countered extremism, that countered terrorism. And to turn and walk away from this population, I think has implications. Something that I've noted, the extremist elements, and whether you're talking about Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram, all these extremist elements are watching very closely to how the world's rhetoric doesn't line up with its actions vis-a-vis Afghanistan. And they're taking note of that. And there are fragile governments in other parts of the world that are taking note of, one, that the U.S. right now is not proving to be a reliable ally. At the same time that we know that extremism and terrorism is on the rise, we are leaving precisely the people who have stood up and fought against these forces.
Right. That's who we're abandoning, the people who did try to get with the project of pushing back on that extremism. Do you is the Taliban sensitive at all to these critiques or to their global reputation? When they came back in, they initially at least paid some lip service to not going back to full gender apartheid, that they're not doing that in practice, of course. Does anyone have leverage over them on an issue like this? Is there any way to get to them or change them, push them in a different direction?
The way that I think about it, there are differences within the Taliban. There are elements of the Taliban that see that this is not to their strategic advantage. I'm not saying that they're more moderate or they have more liberalized perspectives, but they are strategic. And if they see that this is hurting them, that this is actually going to hurt them in a meaningful way, I think that they would put more pressure on the system. They have put pressure on the system, on their system, and on their own leader, on issues that they have seen in terms of power dynamics, resources, etc. They push back. On this one, they have assessed that it's not hurting them. It's not hurting them enough for them to push back against their leadership. In Haibatullah, it has the most extreme policies, and some of them claim that they are not happy with them, but they're not pushing back in any type of meaningful way against them. And I do believe if we had signaled in a consistent way, and I'm talking back from the Doha Agreement and the fact that it was very convenient under the Trump administration, conveniently left out Afghan women and the Afghan people, it was a signal to them that we are going to say one thing and do another. Under those circumstances, there is not an incentive to push back against gender apartheid and against these extremist policies. What Afghans say is they don't want another military intervention. They want enough pressure so that Afghan people are very pragmatic, and they see that if there's enough pressure to bear, and if the international community matches its rhetoric with resources, with real support, and with meaningful and strategic pushback against the Taliban, it creates space for change within the country. And that is not happening right now.
There's a certain amount that the Taliban is just going to do, but also the failure to make this a major agenda point in whatever global engagement there is with the Taliban, that's a choice. And it's a choice we don't have to be making.
Absolutely. And I think we are not linking it to our strategic interests. We are just treating this as a human rights issue that can be treated with performative rhetorical support. If we want to move towards moderation and push back against extremism, we have to support the people that are pushing back against it. When women disappear from public space, you can be sure that you are creating a space for extremist ideologies to take hold. It's consistent. We've seen it in many other countries. So it is linked to our security concerns in an extremely volatile neighborhood, and which we have abandoned a country that we took polls repeatedly for decades in Afghanistan, and consistently Afghans overwhelmingly expressed support for the U.S. This is the ally that not only did we abandon, but we are showing in a multitude of different ways that we don't stay with our partners and we don't support our partners. It does not bode well in countries and contexts that have long memories.
So maybe a question to close on. One of the aims of this podcast is to cut through misinformation and disinformation that's out there on displacement issues. So when you think of the discourse around Afghanistan, whether in the US or globally, is there anything you would want to set the record straight on?
Within the US, I want to counter some of what the administration has been saying, that the Afghan population have not been vetted. The vetting systems that were in place under the Trump administration were improved upon, and Afghans were one of the most vetted populations in the pipeline. So that's one thing that I want to say. And the second thing that I want to say is the people that are refugees, no one wants to leave their home. These people leave their home because they have no other recourse and they are under threat. And the third thing that I want to say, I want to end with a quote from an Afghan woman who wrote just a really powerful letter to me. She wanted me to share. And she said, and she is an Afghan woman who in Afghanistan, she would be hiding from the Taliban in her home because she was an Afghan leader. She's in her home hiding from ICE. She is living a life that is eerily similar to her sisters in Afghanistan because of the extreme threats that she feels like she's under here in terms of being sent back to a country in which her life will certainly be under threat. But she said, "We are survivors of a war we never chose. We came to this country seeking peace, not opportunity. We arrived with nothing, no homes, no careers, no savings, no sense of belonging. We have to rebuild our lives from zero. We want to contribute to America and to its workforce and its democracy. We are not the enemy. If anything, we are the living evidence of what war destroys and what peace must protect." This is the population that's seeking asylum in the United States.
I think that's a really powerful place to end. Rina, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you for putting a spotlight on this very important issue.
We will make sure to keep doing so. Now for our weekly roundup of a few other stories that we are tracking. I want to start with a piece of positive news. Champions of the Golden Valley, a powerful documentary about skiing in Bamyan, a city in Afghanistan, has won a national Emmy for Outstanding Sports Documentary. The film was made before the fall of Kabul and shows how a local ski movement takes off and unites a community. It's a beautiful human story that speaks to the power of sport while acknowledging the challenges of forcible displacement. And those challenges now include the subject of the film himself, who has had to flee Afghanistan and seek refuge in Germany. The documentary is streaming for free on Olympics.com, and we hope you watch. Next up, we have just gotten some disturbing new data from the State Department's Refugee Bureau. Nearly every refugee admitted to the U.S. over the last year has been a white Afrikaner from South Africa. Since last October, the U.S. has admitted 6,668 people through the refugee program, of whom 6,665 were white South Africans. The three others who were admitted were Afghans who were allowed in last November. And since then, nothing but Afrikaners. And last month, of course, every single one of 599 people admitted to the U.S. as a refugee was an Afrikaner. There's no way to sugarcoat this. It is a racist policy intended to turn refugee eligibility solely into a matter of race rather than a question of persecution. But there is some hope. Last week, a federal court in Rhode Island ruled that the Trump administration's suspension of all pending asylum applications from roughly 40 countries subject to its travel ban was illegal. So it is encouraging to see the courts pushing back on that. If you're as fired up as we are about this issue, please go to the Take Action page on refugiesinternational.org and sign our petition to tell the White House to keep its promise to refugees, and while they're at it, to stop detaining and interrogating lawfully admitted refugees who have made it to the United States. We will put a link to all that in the show notes. Next, at the top, we played a clip from Secretary Rubio speaking with Congresswoman Grace Meng in one of the 4 congressional hearings in which he testified last week. He talked about a wide range of issues, including the dismantling of USAID, Sudan, Gaza, global health, Ebola, and a range of other things. A few things that we wanted to just specifically call out from claims that he made. One, he acknowledged the need to provide aid in Sudan. And it was good to hear, but the reality is the amounts of money the U.S. is putting forward are not matching the rhetoric that we heard from the Secretary last week. He argued that the problem in Sudan is not an unwillingness of the U.S. to provide aid, but rather bottlenecks or problems in the distribution of aid in country. That's just flat out false. There are plenty of obstacles to distributing aid in Sudan, but they're not any greater than they were in the final year of the Biden administration. And in that year, the U.S. provided $880 million of humanitarian aid in Sudan, according to UN tracking figures. That number decreased by half last year in the first year of the Trump administration. And now, midway through 2026, is half yet again. So far this year, the U.S. has given $222 million of humanitarian aid to Sudan versus 4 times as much, $880 million in the last year of the Biden administration, with similar conditions and similar challenges of access. So this is really not about distribution challenges. This is simply about the U.S. abdicating its role and its ability to save lives of people who are starving and suffering amidst the war in Sudan. On foreign aid more generally, the Secretary again reiterated the claims he has made before that no one has died as a result of the aid cuts, and responding to Congressman Gabe Amo about the number of people, the number of lives that are being lost through the aid cuts, he said it's a false number, and then said that, in effect, no death of any individual is the responsibility of the United States. As Congressman Amo pointed out, and as we and other organizations and other reports have documented, in fact, there are many people dying as a result of the aid cuts. There are people who have died of cholera in South Sudan as a result of the aid cuts. There are people who are dying right now of Ebola in Congo as a result of the aid cuts. There are people who have starved to death as a result of the aid cuts. There are people who have died of malaria as a result of the aid cuts. There are people who are dying today of HIV as a result of the aid cuts. There are children today being born with HIV needlessly because the prophylaxis that would have prevented mother-to-child transmission was cut and disrupted as a result of the aid cuts. It is beyond infuriating to hear the Secretary continuing to claim that no one is dying as a result of his aid cuts, and I wish that he would just own the fact that these cuts are killing people rather than continue denying it. And finally, World Refugee Day is coming up on June 20, and that means we are commemorating and celebrating the work of refugees all month. We have a few ways that you can get involved. First, we are hosting a virtual town hall on June 16th that will feature our 2026 refugee fellows from places like Sudan, Syria, Uganda, and Nicaragua. And they'll talk about some of the latest on their work and their activism. So you can go to the events page on our website to register. Then on June 18th, if you're in the DC area, we're hosting an arts and culture event titled Courage Together. The event will feature arts workshops, performances by award-winning refugee poets, musicians, and storytellers. The events page on our website has all you need to know, but we'll drop a link in the show notes as well. And finally, we'd be grateful if you'd support our work this month with a donation. It has never been more necessary to fight to build a more welcoming world for people forced from their homes. And we are seeing every day how it's possible to make a genuine difference when we come together, organize, and push back. But our ability to do that depends on our supporters. So we have set ourselves a goal this month of raising $20,000 by World Refugee Day. You can make a donation at our website, refugeesinternational.org, and we have pulled together a really cool recipe book compiled of recipes suggested by refugees from around the world, including some of our fellows, and we will send you a copy if you make a contribution. Thanks so much for listening, and join us again next time. Thanks so much for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to Forced From Home on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed the episode, consider donating to support our work at refugeesinternational.org or the link in our show notes. For more, follow Refugees International on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and stay tuned for more Forced From Home episodes coming soon.